So with this question, we see that we have a diagram as well as a word problem. So let's look at what's being said here and figure out a good strategy for how to answer this particular question. So we see the diagram here. I suggest anytime you see a graphical diagram to pay attention to the axes. So we have our y-axis here, and we see that there are numbers or amounts spent ranging from $100 to $500. And on our x-axis here, we see that we have months, so January, February, March, April, and May. Now let's look at the question. The question says, the line graph above shows the amount of money spent on office supplies by Jacksonville Tax Service during the first 5 months of the year. According to the graph, the amount it spent in May was how many times the amount it spent in January? So there's our question. The very last sentence of this question gives us what we're looking for. According to the graph, the amount spent in May was how many times the amount it spent in January. So we can actually translate that sentence into an equation. Let's see how to do that. According to the graph, the amount it spent in May, so amount spent in May, so we'll just say May, was, which represents equals, how many times? Well, anytime you see the word how many, it means we don't know how many times. So I'm going to call that x, and it says time, so x times the amount it spent in January, so x times January. So there's my equation. This equation represents this question, and therefore I no longer need to look at the wording of the question itself, and I can just look at what I've written here off to the side as my guideline for how to answer the question. So the question does tell me that the graph gives me the information. It says according to the graph above. So how much money was spent for office supplies in the month of May? So we go to our graph, we find May, we go up, and we see that the amount spent is here, and that amount correlates with $400. So now, instead of having to write the word May, we know that the amount spent in May was 400. So we have 400 equals. We still don't know the number times, so we use x still. But we figure out how much was spent in January according to the graph. So we find January. We go up on January, and we see that the amount spent in January was $200. So we have x times $200. So really now all we're trying to do is get x by itself. Many of you may already know the answer, because basically we're trying to figure out 400 is equal to x times $200. So if you don't know the answer already, the way that you isolate x is by dividing both sides. In fact, let's write this in a simpler way. So let's say we have $400 equals x times 200. The traditional or standard way to write that would be $200 x, because you always put your coefficient or your number in front of your variable. So now if we're trying to isolate the variable x, I can divide both sides by $200 because $200 divided by $200 is 1, leaving x all by itself. And when I divide the left-hand side by $200, we get that 400 divided by 200. Anytime you have zeros, you can always cross zeros out. So we really have 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So x equals 2, and therefore our answer here is choice B.